love this, and I hope you enjoyed this. This is really funny.
I'm with the Surfrider Foundation, and I was hoping you would sign this petition to help us ban plastic bags in Oregon.
I don't think I want to do that.
Oh, a skeptic, okay.
I think I need to read the appropriate literature before I sign anything.
Okay, here you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? I'm Stanger. Hi, I'm Chris.
How are you? That's our son, Alex. You just spoke to him.
Could you just explain, help us to understand why you would shut the door on our son? I'm the type that I have to read it first, have it right in my brain, and then I'll decide.
Yeah, but he's the type, and we're the type that needs instant answers.
That's unfortunate.
It's actually fortunate because that's the way that a person learns.
You know what? Let's try it again.
Let's try it again.
For Alex's sake.
Alex.
Okay. Nice to see you.
What was the name of your organization? The Surfrider Foundation.
All right, son, you did.
That sounds good to
It's
me.
so good. Yeah, have you read the literature, though, that you're...
Hey, listen. Literature is one of those things that everyone knows. Listen, if you can be fine as long as you know this kid's a good guy.
I'm sure he is.
And, you know, just sign a damn thing or
Close the door.
You're nice.
Thank you. Can I help you?
Hi. I'm from the Surfrider Foundation. My name is Alex. My name is Alex. And I was hoping you would sign this petition to help us ban plastic bags in Oregon.
Tell me more. Just making sure you're smiling at him. Tell me more.
They cause pelican cancer.
They don't cause pelican cancer.
Who knows?
Does it say it in there?
They do.
Can you show me?
Shrug. And
That means what?
That means it's for you to decide. He's doing pretty good.
Well, not if he's telling people plastic bags cause pelican cancer.
Let's try this. Just move your mouth and I'll just do it for you.
So, well, you look pretty great. I mean, I think everybody looks pretty great. I mean, people in general, they're always looking good and they're trying their best. Anyway, well, hey, listen, just sign it and let's get out of here.
Get a life and stop smothering your child.
I failed.
No, you didn't.
Hi, I understand that my son and his wife are here because you wouldn't sign my grandson's petition. And I was just wondering why you won't sign the petition. I feel like I did a good job if they can't convince you. They did a good job, didn't they? Just sign it.
Oh my God.
I think we should go to ice cream.
Ice cream.
Ice cream.
Ice cream.
Ice cream. Ice cream. Ice cream. Ice cream. Ice cream. Pistachio.
Oh my God.
Okay.
That's funny.
So,
That's fantastic.
Okay.
softening.
okay, so how many of you have any clients that have families like that? Huh?
All of them.
All of them? All of them recently? So if you want to put that up. So all of them. So one of the things we know is that, and I love that little video because I don't know how many of you, when you work with your clients, automatically do a family map or genogram on the first visit. So one of the things that we do in terms of how we give the gift of recovery through intervention is on the first phone call, I will probably spend, I will say I'm doing with a stick figure, and I'm going to do a family map or a genogram. And what do we usually, we know that in the families that we work with, one, some people may answer everybody else's sentences, like those wonderful people did there. Then we also know that there's a lot of secrets where, shh, we don't want anyone to know about Aunt Jenny, Uncle Bill, because God, if they know about that. We also know that if we look back, we're gonna find maybe generations of trauma, possibly addiction, possibly mental health, substance abuse disorders. I always look for, also look for changes in income, changes in migration. You may find someone who's a Holocaust survivor. You may find a family that migrated from Ireland. But taking a look and learning about that family is going to be really, really important. And it really helps you locate that this person that may be and I call them the ILO, the identified loved one, I do. I think they are the identified loved one. And sometimes that identified loved one may be even healthier than the family system. So today, some of you have heard me speak before. I really would love this to be a conversation amongst colleagues. I will talk to you a little bit, and I'm going to make this a little bit faster than I usually do because I really want your input. I think there's some good questions that can be asked. It's talking about how we give the gift of recovery, and really where anybody who is a trained interventionist comes in, it's really when outpatient fails. It's really when everybody is absolutely desperate. They have tried absolutely everything, and nothing seems to work. And so oftentimes when people call us, they've had so many other invitations to change. They might have had jail, they might have had hospital, they might have ended up sleeping, but the families usually have put on what I call their lovely denial blankets. You know, they can't see what they can't see. And I think the advantage of what kind of some of the work we do is we go into the home. This one. So we know, and I'm not going to bore you because you're all addiction specialists, but addiction treatment is changing. So when was the first definition of addiction being a substance abuse disorder? When did that first come about by the American Medical Society? Anybody know the date? So in 1954, believe it or not, the American Medical Association said that substance abuse or alcoholism was a disease, just as the same as heart disease or diabetes. Okay? And what were the characteristics of heart disease or diabetes?
Chronic, progressive.
Chronic, progressive, and if left untreated, fatal. Okay, so it took all the way from and most of the time when people take a look at addiction or substance abuse disorders, what is the first thing that, well, I was speaking with a mother yesterday, and the mother has been addicted to her son's problem for well over 10 years. And I've been working with this family. I've been working with this family for just under about a year now. And by the time they reached me, they had already spent over $300,000 on treatment. And I was doing some family coaching with them. And it was really a blessing to be able to meet them. And finally, after working with them, and I said, you know what? Finally, you're addicted in the same way your loved one is addicted, but you're addicted to the problem. You're not in the solution. So I presented a radical idea to her. I said, you know what? You've been going to Al-Anon now a year. I'd like you to go to open AA meeting. She said, what? Oh, I can't do that. And I went, why not? We do this over the phone a lot. And she goes, I never, ever, ever, ever could do that. And I go, you never, ever, ever could do that? That's how we sort of talk over the phone. And Mr. Merrick knows that's true. And I go, she said, those people. And I went, you gotta be kidding me. I just told you we've been working for a year. You're addicted to the problem. You've got a wonderful family. You're powerless. We go over the serenity prayer all the time. We give you homework and everything. I want you to go because I think you could benefit now from considering yourself an addict. Very radical. A lot of the families we see are addicted to the problem. They're not in the solution. And when we go in to make that movement, whether you are seeing someone individually in an inpatient program, an outpatient program, you really are generating, it's like if I had a pond and I threw a penny in and watched that ripple go around, if we don't generate that rapid change in all those systems, I think that your identified loved one or identified patient, identified client, or however you call them, is not going to stand a chance without changing people, places, things where they are. So I love it that the fact that there's the American Society of Addiction Medicine. I'm sure you're all familiar. How many of you are not? Are you all familiar with the ASAM definition of addiction? Okay. So, but it's great, and it's a great psychoeducational tool to share with your families, to share with your clients. It's really important to know that all of a sudden, that's there. I don't want to do this one. And everybody asks you, when you meet a family, what is their main concern about their loved one? Or you meet, in Hollywood now, where there's a lot of people we meet that might be business managers, entertainment lawyers, stylists, hairdressers. What do they want to have happen to their loved one? Or their boss, or their employee? They want it fixed. They want it fixed. Get them fixed. Your job. How many? Is that your job today to get them fixed? Yeah? I bet that's your job. Fix them, right, Carlton?
That's what they told me.
That's what they tell you. So my good friend Wayne Ryder said that we're really, when we think about families, we oftentimes are misguided. We need to think about families in terms of compensation. You know, we can't fix their loved one. Perhaps they need to fix themselves, but we must include them in the very beginning. And I really totally agree with that. So, what is recovery? Well, this is a thing and everyone seems to narrowly define recovery. So today I want to challenge you, because recovery is usually identified as the identified loved one. Recovery is defined as a voluntarily maintained lifestyle characterized by sobriety, personal health, and citizenship. Have no idea what citizenship means. Do you vote in elections? I'm not too sure. But it means that somehow or other you're able to pay your bills and do it. But I want to include, and this is, I'm sorry, I touched this and it just moves. It just scares me. Oh, now I did something else. Okay, it just moves too quickly. I'm used to my own computer. I apologize, Spring. But anyhow, I think that one of the things we need to take a look at is, how do you define recovery? How does your treatment center define recovery? Do we include the whole macro system? Do we include the community? What does our community say about recovery? I suddenly found myself living in West Hollywood. It is by far one of the most open bar areas I have ever seen. I came from San Diego, for example, where I had major grants in the Pacific Beach area, where on any given day, 160,000 young adults or servicemen may flood into the area. And when we talk about reducing on a public health harm reduction, we talk about reduced risk, we talk about having food served, we talk about having staggered closings, we talk about cops and shops, decoys. And then I moved to West Hollywood and I find out like everything goes in terms of bars, they don't even have to sell food.
Right.
Okay, so there's no reduced risk. So when we talk about recovery, I ask you to take a look and make your definition of recovery include a macro system. So how many AA and NA meetings and NAMI meetings are within a 2-mile radius of this location?
Not 2 miles.
2 miles, 5 miles? Okay, so it's really good to know when you're thinking about choosing recovery or you're working with your clients, where are you going to place them? For example, I know in Long Beach, for example, right near, across the street from the Art Museum, there's over 268 meetings in almost less than a 5-block location. So, you know, when you're helping people change, you want to really think about that. But I do like to take a look at what are healthy families. And McManus, one is a social worker, one's a psychologist. If you haven't met their book, they have a wonderful book. It's called 10 Keys to Healthy Families. And very often, you might have families that you might want to share this with. So healthy families, everybody lives on a continuum. You know, what's acceptable, I'm sorry, I'm walking back and forth. What's acceptable and not acceptable behavior. So, for example, I always like this, how do people talk and love? And I know I've done this before, but can I use you for a second? No, they just got food in his mouth. Is that nice to do?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, thank you. So if I go over to you and I say, I love you! you son of a bitch, right? You know, what put you in the classic double bind, right? So how do we talk and how do we love? A lot of do we walk our talk? It's just as simple as that. You know in the first 7 seconds, some of you know me, so I know you approve of me. But I also know in the first 7 seconds, those of you that didn't know me, you formed an opinion about me. Can you trust me? Will I have something to offer you? That's evidence-based. It far supersedes anything. And can I work with you? Will you open your heart to me? Will you tell me your innermost secrets? How will you do that? How do families or how do individuals adapt to change? Sometimes people adapt to change that you won't believe. I'm going to change some of the things, but I am going to give you Jeffrey and I oftentimes team together, and the other day we were in a house. And there wasn't an elephant in the middle of the living room. There was a big chair. And in that chair and next to the chair were a lot of prescription drugs and benzodiazepines, but they were prescription non-opium. There were sex toys around. It's a house that has about 6 children in it. This became a fortress that children from young ages all the way up had to walk through. The person living in this chair had lived in this chair for almost 8 months. Ruling, holding hostage the whole family. Adapting to change. That family made that a normative behavior. Our job when we came in there was sort of to blow it apart. I mean, that's sort of what you do. How do people share time together? Some families don't share time together. You know? They don't have time. Oftentimes people are working. So how do you define intimacy? What do you see? How do you see it? Who's in charge? Who's on first? Who's on second? You know, when you were younger, and you had a parent or 2 parents, who did you go to when you wanted something? Who'd you go to?
Dad.
Dad? Because he would always say yes?
Kinda, yeah.
Kinda. So I argue that everybody in this room knows how to work the room. Okay?
My
So if
mother
you
wouldn't
didn't,
allow it.
huh?
My mother, you couldn't work the room with her.
You couldn't work the room with her. God bless her. She knew how about boundaries. Most of the families we work with, they're like this, rubber. They have no boundaries. Well, let me think about it. Okay. You know, the boundaries are never consistent. And that's a really good look at them. How do we balance closeness and difference? You know, we were doing an intervention one time with a very unhealthy family. Can we use your first second? Move your chair. And this was and all of a sudden where the person's ready to talk, and the goal of an intervention is to move someone to treatment. Well, clinically, and I'm a clinician, there are things that happen that you don't touch even right that second, but all of a sudden pretend you're a male, okay? It doesn't matter, you can be a female. And I'm just like, hi, I just want to, like, it was very sexually inappropriate. Okay? I just sat on your lap to tell you about how much I loved you. And I was a grown person. Very sexually inappropriate. There was no boundary between them. And one wondered in my brain, is there incest? Was there incest? Because that was a good thing. How do we become close? I love you, but I'm not going to be with you. What happens there? What is accepting difference? How much difference is accepted? How much difference is tolerated in a family? Or, you know, if we were in San Francisco right now, I love Goldman. You all know who Goldman is, right? Who's Goldman?
He's the gold statue guy for you.
Yeah, and he just walks around, he's in Union Square, and he has a great old time. But if I walked in all tonight with Gold LeMay, you'd have thought, what is this nutcase doing in the middle of Culver City? So, but if I was in the middle of WeHo, I think it'd be okay.
Right.
okay? Especially when it's Fun Day Sunday.
Yes.
It would not be seen as deviant. So how do we accept difference? What is okay? Sometimes we have families that we work at where the difference is outstanding. We were recently in a home that was really very religious. However, one of the family members has decided that because they're using drugs, they're really in mania, I think, very sexually promiscuous. They had entered into a master-slave relationship, so 50 Shades of Grey. And in this home, though, are all big statues of religious icons, the devout Catholic. The juxtaposition of the two, in my eyes, was just startling. You've got someone in a master-slave relationship, in mania, very disturbed, in a kink relationship, and had sexual trauma. From the genogram, I learned there was sexual trauma at age 13. But nonetheless, there's this. So how do we, what is that? How do you see the positive? Is that in your life, is it always a disaster, or is there a possibility? How do you see it? What, do you wake up every morning and do a grateful list? Good, you need to. How do families solve problems? And how, if there are two parents, how do they parent together? And all these things are just really important for you when you're doing it. This is another schema, but we know, and oh, by the way, I love that napkin. See the elephant there with the bottles and the confusion? So none of you had the pleasure of knowing my mother. Her name was Dorothy Swartz Wallach Levine. I think she had another name before, but I don't remember it. God bless her. She was a wonderful, delightful alcoholic, but she grew up in a family of mental health, of substance abuse, of suicide, and trauma. And when you take a look at it, and you're not her daughter anymore, you can really have great compassion. But those were her cocktail napkins, 1940 cocktail napkins. And so we know that before interventions, people call us, and they are confused, in fear, they're angry. Well, you've got to help me. But what am I helping you about? This is, and how much can we uncover? So people call us when they're sort of stymied. Outpatient programs call us when they no longer know what to do. So they're usually very complex things. We find out the families or the entertainment lawyer or the entertainment manager, they need their star to go on. That show must go on. So they are attached somehow or other to the problem. And somehow or other, even though we hate what's happening, we're getting some unconscious or conscious gratification from it. There's some payoff. We get to be a hero. We get to be a martyr. We get to be a victim. Last night I listened for 1 hour to a young man rant. Until I said, I will not, you're being so disrespectful. There were 10 people on a phone call, and his wife is in a treatment center. And he complained and complained with such narcissism and rage and resentment because he had to take some extra responsibility while she got him. And she happened to be on the phone call, because a lot of times we'll have our loved ones on the phone call when I do a team meeting. And finally I said, you know what, we can no longer have you on a phone call. You're being disrespectful. And you think about it, and so sometimes people are so angry that they have become the problem, not their loved one. Interventions, people are usually emotionally and cognitively dysregulated. We get a lot of confusion, a lot of emotionality, a lot of kind of things. Jeffrey, who I often do some work with, we did an intervention earlier this year on a young woman. God bless her. She was borderline, a clutterer. She hadn't left the house for almost 5 years. She was, in terms of family history, she was the second child born into a family where the first child was developmentally delayed. He had an IQ of about 30 to 35. So you can already tell what the attachment issues would be. Mother was Mother was a very big woman. I'm not so big, but everybody's bigger than me. But she was big, boisterous, really a rageaholic. Had been married several times, highly competent and skilled. Had already been through about 20 or 30 therapists on her own because she hated therapists. But she was a rageaholic, and my guess is also a clutterer. Father had been a very famous psychologist at one time. He had suffered a stroke, and he was absolutely psychotic. When we started the intervention, he kept saying, "You fucking motherfucker, you fucking motherfucker." I'm going like, oh my God, I cannot talk to anybody. Grandmother was a Holocaust survivor and 90 years old, just beautiful. An uncle who was present, handsome guy, sort of a stockbroker kind of guy, he said to me, "I just love to marry borderlines." And I'm going, okay, and our job was to help this young woman who had not left her house. And you see where my Diet Coke is? Picture for 3 days, a rumpled, crumpled Pepperidge Farm cookie bag, just right in the middle. Picture that room full of clutter, hoarding. Picture this room full of hoarding. There was no longer bedrooms. And our job was, and you have to believe. So when you do an intervention, you have to really believe in yourself and in the system, that you can actually move something. Our job was to get her to go, not just for an assessment, to go to a doctor's office, to go to CVS over a couple of days, to get a TB test, to get the TB test checked, and to see whether or not we could get her an outpatient. But in looking at that family, that would have been a mistake, just to intervene on her. There had to be a treatment plan for the entire family. And there also had to be a treatment, hi, come on in. Oh, welcome. There also had to be a treatment plan which included sometimes someone skilled in mental health to help declutter it. So when we look at that, this family was really very challenging and probably something like you've experienced, but if we don't take a look at the whole system, we're really at the finish. So I always think of everybody as putting together an accountability team. So accountability teams, in the beginning, and here they are, they're all toasting, right? I have a lot of times people will say, well, I'm not going to give up drinking, or I'm not going to give up using. I only smoke pot. That's the latest one I hear.
Right.
I only smoke pot, so it's not really so bad. But my loved one can go, I said, it's no deal. If you've got these issues, you need to take care of them. But we know that most times when we're first dealing with the family system, they don't have labels for their emotions. So I don't know how many of you have that old, wonderful, old-fashioned feeling chart. Please go pull it out. It's the best. So we know that people who are part of this accountability team, they're angry, they're resentful, they're sad, they're mad, they're depressed, they're loving, they're worried, they're anxious, they're impatient. Do this now. Get this fixed now. They're frustrated, shocked, embarrassed, confused, terrified, controlling, at wit's end. They're wanting pain to go away. Make my pain go away. Please help me. Please fix this. And their hearts are hurting. And you really have to acknowledge that everybody's heart is hurting. Because this is a disease that when you intervene with your heart. And if you don't touch the heart, I don't think you can do this work. So, interventions, they always include everybody. And you see in this model, there are different models, but participants are experts. They're knowledgeable. I do a procedure which is called, based on research, it's called portraiture. So if any of you have ever read the author Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, she's really an interesting woman. She's African American. She is the only endowed chair in Harvard that has an endowed chair named for her. And she started her work doing portraiture, which is really qualitative research and interviewing, by looking at a high school. Her most famous piece of work is I've Known Rivers, Lives and Loss of Liberation. And I highly recommend you do that. But what she says is that when we are interviewers, we are co-collaborators. And what I do is when I get together an accountability team, I will interview, someone will say to me, who are the most important people to your loved one? And they're going to say A, B, C, D, and E, and then they're invariably going to say, well, I think Charlie might be okay, but he's not okay. And I'll say, well, let's interview Charlie too. Because invariably the person they leave out is the main character who interviewed. And I'll ask them and I'll say, please have them all call me separately. And we speak separately. And I ask the same questions to everybody. And we have a dialogue. And what happens is I get a portrait of this person, which is based on a retrospective analysis. Because what the first caller may tell me may be very small to what the second, third, and fourth do. And you never get what we call a saturation of data. So the questions really are, tell me how much you love this person. Tell me something special about them. What makes them important in your life? What has happened in the last 6 months or a year that really has you concerned and worried about your loved one, about your friend, about your employer, about your star? And you really are going to get some very concrete examples. Oh, it's not that they made me mad. It's last week when they took the car and they were loaded and they wrapped it around a tree. Or when they left the children unattended. Or when the kids couldn't get picked up at school because the teacher called. You know, you get very, very precise, rich data this way. And then you go, what is your fears? And they'll never say yes. They'll never say yes. They'll always say no. And what are your hopes? Your hopes are that they might get help. And what are your hopes for yourself? Because these people are really wounded that you talk to when you're doing this. The people who are participants in an intervention are very wounded.
Yeah.
They're hurting. Their hearts are hurting. And they're doing things that sometimes don't make any sense. And just because you might meet someone who may say that I've been in Al-Anon for a year or so, I understand, please do not take that on face value. We have had families who are active in Al-Anon and they don't know anything. They hear, because Al-Anon is great to be bridged to, it's still a self-help group. And I have a wonderful presentation I sometimes do on the Clinician's Guide to 12 Step, how you integrate that. But I mean, recently we had a family and they've been going to Al-Anon, which is a godsend for them. However, they were never talking to their child again, paying for health insurance, and watching every day. They would call me up and they would say, they looked at the telephone and they knew exactly who he was calling. And they were so addicted to this telephone bill, they were driving themselves crazy. And I go, so what I hear is you're not talking to your kid, so you're having a limited relationship with him. You're paying for his health insurance, and you have this false expectation because you get this telephone bill every day that you know what you're doing. And they also had controlled the entire family and cut this whole kid off from the entire family. So they weren't allowed to talk. And they said, no, you're allowed to talk, but what you can only do is have a limited relationship based on the unhealthy choices he's making. So I think you have to be really careful when you assess what your things are. Interventions are value-driven, meaning that they're there for the common good. Even though I've been a trained clinician, I've been licensed since 1973. That's a long time to have a license. And I can clinically make assessments. My main primary focus is to have these people come together for the common good. Now, if I think someone needs counseling, I will redirect it after. If I fired people from interventions who I don't think will be helpful, and sometimes they've been payers, so you just don't do it. It is evidence-based. I'll talk a little bit of the modalities that are used that I use for the most part are solution-focused. after a solution, so it's very pragmatic. And if you don't know solution-focused therapy by Berg and In Sun Young, it's a great one. Motivational interviewing, I'm a trained MIND trainer of trainers. Motivational interviewing in and of itself will never get you to a yes, but it will get you to roll with resistance very well. You're giving cognitive behavioral because you're giving people homework assignments. You're doing that. You are using a little bit of DBT because everybody's emotionally dysregulated and you're trying to get sort of the emotions there and there. So there's a lot of things. And you're looking for a solution. The solution is you want to help the whole family get help. If you're working, and I really feel strongly that an interventionist job is not just to get someone to drop them off at a treatment center. I don't think that's the job. At least that's not the way I define it. Interventions are merely invitations to change, and every day in your offices you invite people all the time to change. Who did you invite to change today? Who did you invite to change today? Invite anyone to change? Look at an option, explore a possibility. Yeah. There's a lot of different models. I don't know how familiar are you with all the models that are out there? Are you all familiar? I don't want to give you information that you already have. So the way interventions first started was with a gentleman named Vern Johnson. And we know that Minnesota was known as the home of 10,000 lakes and 10,000 treatment centers. And Vern Johnson was a physician. And he did a lot of work in hospitals and is really considered the classic model, which is a surprise model. And one of the more classic interventions that was done with the surprise model, which was fairly disrespectful, is how many of you, most of you are not that young, but you don't know who Betty Ford was. Mm-hmm. So Betty Ford was intervened on in one of the most disrespectful ways known to mankind. Does anyone know the story about Betty?
No.
So Betty was a pill and alcohol, and she was really causing a lot of commotion and a lot of disrespect to her family. And one morning, she was in her pajamas, never got dressed. I think they woke her up out of bed. A lieutenant, I'm going to get the Navy wrong, but it was a Navy officer, arrived to help her go to the hospital in Long Beach. And there was no discussion. It was go get now, and she got her treatment in a Navy hospital. And that was the end of the discussion. It was fairly disrespectful. And if there is a good film about it, if you ever want to see it. It was a surprise method. Hi, guess who's coming to dinner? Her children were all there. And she felt a lot of shame-based. So part of the reason that Betty Ford was founded is she wanted a place for women. She wanted a place that could be respectful. That being said, the surprise method was how everybody was taught. I first learned about interventions to give you a classic thing. When Betty Ford was being started, Hazleton was really considered kingpin of the treatment industry. And it's interesting now that they've now merged together. Mm-hmm. But what was happening is everybody said, go west, young man. And Betty Ford was being founded by people who worked at Hazleton. I'm from San Diego, and there was a hospital called Scripps McDonald, mm-hmm. which in the day was really a kingpin of it. And they had their staff was being staffed again by that. Well, my job as a university professor, and I apologize for all these many years for the paucity of education in substance abuse that is given in every graduate school across the country. You get one course. I was given the distinction of developing the first substance abuse class for the School of Social Work at San Diego State. And about that time, in terms of eating disorder, there was a wonderful man named Ed Lacey, who some of you may still know, who was then head of Raider. And he brought to my class one day a really, think of Carlton, a very tall, strapping, charismatic gentleman. And his name was Frank Picard. And Frank had been the director of what we now know as Springbrook. He was a pastor, and he wrote a book called Family Intervention, which was a little bit in opposition to Mr. Johnson, but nonetheless, it was still in that genre of surprise. Well, I don't know what happened that day to my classmates or my students. I can tell you what happened to me. My heart, when Mr. Picard spoke, really, really resonated. I had grown up in an alcoholic family. My life changed considerably at a family program at Hazleton. I had sudden death, I had suicide, but I love drama. You give me a drama, honey, and I'm great. I am so good with crisis intervention. I can get you, and also as a social worker, I can get you almost anything you want. So if you need something, just tell me. I'm a great resource getter. Well, when he spoke, my heart said, this is what I need to do. And so that was where I got my supervision and my initial training, was below those 30 years ago. And I'm very, very grateful. And I always remember, if you ever can get the book Family Intervention by Frank Picard, it's really wonderful. But we know that today Ken Seeley, John Southworth, they all use more or less the surprise model. In fact, right now I'm doing this most interesting project, which I'll share with you. I decided that what I was going to do is interview what were considered we're interviewing across the country what are considered some of the top interventionists across the country, because I want to hear what they have to say. And I'm going to be starting part of my blog will be conversations with. And Southworth said to me, because he knows I'm an invitational interventionist and he knows I have done every model known to mankind, he said, the reason that the surprise method is so good is you've got to be really quick and nimble on your feet. I will tell you I disagree with John Southworth. But that is, the surprise method just really means that you're going to go ahead, you're going to gather together, you're going to do a pre-intervention meeting, you're going to have your group write letters. I don't use letters. And you're going to sort of say, guess who's coming for dinner? Like, instead of you getting food, really what I came to do here tonight was, oh, you forgot why I was really here, didn't you? Guess what? These are all your friends. And I'm just here. I'm Dr. Stanger. I'm a licensed professional. I am a mandated reporter. And today we're really here because we're all worried about you. That's a surprise. And if you have usually even with an invitation, people are a little bit upset that they might have us there. But that's what the surprise. And many people will still do a surprise. Sometimes you'll do a surprise and you didn't know you were going to do a surprise. And by that I mean most of the time I do invitational, but one time I was with one of my teammates and we were going to intervene on a 42-year-old heroin addict. And the mother was a registered nurse and we coached them on how to deliver the invitation. Well, when we got to the house, we said, where's your loved one? You gave the invitation. And she said, well, she was locked in the bathroom. And she stayed in the bathroom all night being locked, which means she was shooting up all night long. And I said, so you didn't give her an invitation? And at that moment, we knew we were dead in the water for that day. It didn't work. She left. She took 16 boxes of popsicles with her. They melted down a long, long driveway, and she waited for her drug dealer to pick up. We were not doing any work that day. So in the invitational models, there's a systemic model. So if you ever have heard of Wayne Rader, that model requires families to go away for a whole weekend. And they're prepped for a whole weekend. In order to do that, it's a 2.5-day whole training for a family. Sometimes that's really difficult for families to do. It's really interesting, and it would only appeal to anybody that was really highly sort of like weekend focused, or they were used to going away. But it's a very highly specialized kind of thing. If you include that in your treatment session, you will. The ARISE model, which is a combination of systems theory, family theory, was developed by a woman by the name of Judith Landau and James Garrett. And that is what we can, an invitational model. And that is, in that model, what happens is you have a chairperson, you have a family meeting, a loved one's invited to the family meeting, you'll do a family genogram, but if all that doesn't work, by the time you get to the third meeting, you're still doing the letters, so it reverts back. Brad Lamb has a model as well, which is it is invitational. You won't use letters, but all of you who are interested, it's really good to see. I maintain that. Well, actually, I don't maintain it's a model, so that's a little bit of one. I maintain that interventions are a process. And that it doesn't matter who you say you are or what model you use, because if you don't make a process, how many of you are therapists in this room? Okay, so how many different theories have you been trained in? Many. And if I asked you, what are you?
Then everyone says eclectic.
You're eclectic because in the end, you've got to use and be nimble on your feet and do what you can do best. And that's the same with an interventionist. You may think that you're doing this and you may think that you're doing that, but if you're not nimble in the middle of this kind of thing, you're not going to work. So I consider interventions to be a process, not a model. And and in this process, there is some strategies that everybody has to go through, no matter what model they say they're doing. They've got to have an agreement and some kind of initiative. You've got to have buy-in. You've got to have a first caller who's going to do something. You're going to have to set an agreement that you're going to do something, and you're going to get somewhere. You're going to have to, so that was what we mean by an engagement. You're going to have to identify who are the key stakeholders in this group. So you're always working with a group. And why are you always working with a group and not necessarily an individual?
Get everyone on board at the same time in the same place.
Well,
Because everybody's part of the problem.
it's part of the problem. And if you just want one-on-one, because most of the time you're going to hear everyone in the group tell you, well, you know, I talked to George about his drinking. And you know what? I told her that she wasn't allowed to stay out all night. And what happens when you go one-on-one with someone who's active in an addiction? You lose. You lose. You'll be crazy. You'll go, oh my God, why are they doing this? I told them not to do this. I've said, if you don't have group consensus and you don't have group boundaries and you don't develop a group strategy. That being said, you still interview everybody individually. Because if you interview them in a group, they're not going to tell you the truth. But one-on-one, like Attorney Merrick, could you give an example of that? Of just interviews. Like what's the
Well,
beauty
one
of
common dynamic that you and I've experienced a lot is that there'll be a family spokesman that will be completely off about the person who's going to move the identified loved one to change. So you're like, you can't invite Dorothy, and Dorothy's the one that's going to be outside the family system and be able to reach the client. So getting them all coordinated in terms of being united on those decisions, and then interviewing to get a better idea of what the problem is.
So you're interviewing separately first, and then getting them together
Yeah.
once you got a whole complete
So
system that's
before
in.
there's an intervention
This
takes
is the game
place,
plan.
and I think that what we do is it's very labor intensive. So there'll be a first call. I will do a genogram, a family map with whoever the first caller is, and then we will interview key stakeholders. Each interview will take maybe 20, at the short end of the stick is 20 minutes long, and that's very short and probably not, but most of them are pretty robust. They'll take over an hour. Then you write up and you gather all this data. Once you have all this data, you're going to bring all the team together. You're also doing a lot of other things at the same time. You're going to be helping someone choose treatment centers. And that is, you'll give referrals to 3 treatment centers. If a treatment center should refer to us, We will honor that if it makes sense. We will say to them, really thank you very much. This is what we've learned about George or Sally or Sue. Does this match well with your profile? And if it doesn't match well with your profile, I will include that treatment center in that discussion and say, where do you think that would be best? Because sometimes you'll get a referral from a treatment center and they can't afford that treatment center, or it turns out that, that treatment center is not for newly diagnosed. It's straight alcohol, and this person really requires psychiatric. So, you work with everybody, but you always honor that. And since we're not responsible for, we don't work with, we're independent, meaning we're not affiliated with any treatment center in the country. We don't take any money from any treatment center in the country. I will take food, dinner, thank you. But, we're not, we have to do that. And then we always go, in a perfect world, if this was my family member, and given the resources you have, it's arrogant, and I know that most of the world does them. I am blessed. I have people that I work with, such as Attorney Merrick, and we're team members. That doesn't mean that I'm always on first and I'm in charge and he's on second. It means that we collaborate. Oftentimes, with that wonderful case I was telling you about, with the young woman who was a clutter, and the father that was so dysfunctional, can you tell them what we ended up having to do?
Well, we had to talk to them separately, because everyone would scatter.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone was so used to ignoring this man because he was really delusional and angry. Just no one talked to him.
And he was so sweet, and really he was a savant, because he could see the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeffrey spent the entire day speaking with him while I spoke with the young girl. And the rest of them, I just let them scatter because they weren't helpful. And you could not do that unless you had two people. You cannot do the kind of work with the young man I just talked to you about, that 5 of us went to see him in his evicted apartment because he wouldn't accept our invitation. The other team member stayed behind to talk with the 6 other family members who were hysterical at that moment in time. You have situations where people might say, I'm going to kill myself. You're going to be on the phone calling 911. Your partner, your teammate is going to be there helping navigate through this emotional dysregulation. These are, I've never had my own office. I've had a university office, but I've always had consent form will travel. And maybe it's because when I was very young, I graduated from Pitt. I went to work for Allegheny County Department of Public Welfare, and was the only white worker in a black area. I was raised by a black woman, and when Martin Luther King was shot. And someone told me that the only way you got real information is if you went to people's homes. And to this day, I still believe that that data is so rich, because what we have seen in our offices is but a glimpse, and we only get self-reports. So I'm really passionate about that. So all the evidence, we talked about this evidence-based strategies. Be nimble on your feet, but be yourself. There's so many different things. It's like being in a moving target. So when John Southworth told me that only surprise interventions, do you need to be nimble on your feet? I invited him to come along with me. I said, just come to one of mine. On any given moment, we could have racing cars. We could have people just going in different directions. And because it is human, we're dealing with humans. We're dealing with lives, and we're dealing with respect. And we just don't know all the time what will happen. One funny one I'll leave you with, I did an intervention about a couple of years ago, and this is the first time, it was when the TV show was, and I walked into the place, and the girl that said, she said, "What? No TV cameras? I'm not going to be on TV? And don't you have a limo?" And I go, I just left those at home. There are a lot of different people that say, I think it's really important, and I'll go back one more slide. I think it's really important for those of you that are in private practice, when you go to choose an interventionist, it is really important to figure out what they know, who they've been trained by, what mentoring they have. It is somewhat like the Wild West in some degrees. I do believe that you can be a natural. You don't necessarily, I think having clinical skills is really good, but you do not have to be, I think that the way we work is I'm the trained clinician, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not good. I always work with someone who is other highly trained. Jeffrey's a lawyer. He's also in recovery, and he will self-reveal that. He always reveals that.
That's
No,
fine.
no, but he always reveals that. But I work with people that are in recovery. I work with people that are there. It's really important for you to be transparent. That doesn't mean that we tell any but our stories, because it's still, you only use yourself in the way that can be helpful to others, because the moment you start talking about yourself, it is not 13-stepping. It is not doing just 12-step work. I think that it's very highly sophisticated. You need to have a really good plan. Oftentimes I will mentor other young interventionists. I think it's very important. You can go to an intervention training, you can get a 3-day training, and then you're sort of left out there to dry. That does not make you an interventionist. I also think that all of you who are clinicians and therapists, you invite people to change every day. This is a highly stylized, in some respects, process, but it's over time. The other thing we do is we sort of have concierge service, in which that we'll talk with the accountability team. I talk with the accountability team at a minimum of once a week, and that may be all 10 people on a conference call. However, when you've got high-risk situations, like, for example, the young man I told you that just left treatment, you may have 25, 30 phone calls a day, and you might be doing other casework. So you have to have built into your own system some flexibility. Well, I've talked enough, and I want to hear from all of you because you're just beautiful.